Hello everyone, hi YouTube. Today I'm back with another economics video. Last week I talked about Gary Stephenson, a British trader who discovered basically a mechanism connecting wealth inequality and lowering standards of living among ordinary people. Um, Basically, to recap, as wealthy people gain more and more wealth, they get more and more passive income, which they then use to spend most of that passive income on buying up assets. This drives up the price of assets and makes them unaffordable for ordinary people. So last week I examined this mechanism and I looked at how it might affect my future and my family's future and basically everyone's family's future. What I'd like to do this week, though, is to look back and see what this mechanism can tell us about the 2008 financial crisis. If you're not familiar with the 2008 financial crisis, basically it was a situation where ordinary people were having to take on larger and larger loans to be able to afford homes, and eventually they were not credible for those loans, which caused a sort of panic in the market, leading to the crisis. If you'd like to learn more about it, I recommend watching the video done by the channel Folding Ideas. It's a really excellent video. I'm not going to just repeat what is discussed in that video. What I actually wanted to do was sort of talk about what I think might be missing from the broader conversation in our understanding around the 2008 crisis. So the big narrative around 2008 is it was kind of a moral failing on two fronts. First, you had greedy bankers who were giving loans, large loans, to people who they knew weren't really credible, but they did it anyway because they were able to mix those loans with some good loans and then insure them, which made them seem like a stable product even though they were really kind of trash. And then you also had a moral failing on the end of the buyer, which is that they were basically living beyond their means. They were buying houses that were too big, too expensive. They were working jobs that wouldn't allow them to afford to live in those houses in the first place. And really, it was just financially unwise for them to take out those loans. And then you had, the added factor that these were adjustable rate mortgages, where a loan could be affordable 1 year, and then the interest rate goes up, and now all of a sudden that loan is unaffordable. So what I think might be missing from this conversation is really how much fault did the borrower have in creating this financial crisis. And I think if we look at asset prices, specifically home prices, between the time when these folks would have grown up, like 1980, 1985, to the time when they were actually purchasing houses, around 2005, 2007, right before the crash in 2008, I think what we'll find is that these people were not trying to buy enormous houses. They were trying to match the lifestyle of their parents. They were trying to buy the same sorts of houses that they grew up in when they were kids. So I compiled a graph with some data points with just median prices around those times, as well as median incomes, just to give us an idea of what inflation was doing at the time for wages. And I think if we take a look at that, we might get a better understanding of the sort of position that these borrowers were in. All right, let's take a look at the graph. So all I've done here is I've got median home prices and median annual income from 1980 to 2007. All of this data was pulled from the US Census website, and it is in actual dollars for the time. So $62,000 is $1980. Nothing's been adjusted for inflation. And then what I've done in this column here is I have just divided the home price by the annual income, basically saying what percentage of median annual income is the current home price. And what you can see both on this column and in the graph is that the median home that a Gen Xer was being raised in, down on this side of the graph, is really quite affordable. And the median home that they are purchasing when they're entering the housing market on this side of the graph is very, very unaffordable. And what this leads me to believe is that the assumption that these folks were just trying to live in bigger houses than they could afford. They were trying to like live large on incomes that couldn't support it. It makes me feel like that's a little misguided. Honestly, what I think happened to the folks who were affected by this crisis is that they were trying to give their kids the same life that they had growing up. So, what that really leads me to thinking is that the way that we understand the 2008 financial crisis is incomplete. We talked about the blame being split between two parties, greedy bankers who wanted to make risky investments and then sell them off to other people saying that they were fine investments, and then unwise borrowing by ordinary people who are trying to live beyond their means. What I think this information is telling us, plus what I've already talked about in the previous video, is that really people were just trying to give their kids the same quality of life that they had growing up. And what they didn't know at the time was that the economy had changed and the sort of life that they grew up with was no longer available to them. If they worked the same jobs as their parents, they weren't going to be able to afford the same standard of living as their parents. They either had to work longer hours or work in more competitive fields just to reach the same standard of living that they had growing up. I wanted to look at this because we don't typically think of inequality as driving towards these sort of crises. We think of them as, unpredictable, crazy one-off events that could never happen again, that were caused by some moral failing. And if we just correct the moral failing, then the system can continue to run as usual, and the economy will grow and everybody will be happy. But what I think I've actually shown here is that inequality caused the 2008 financial crisis by virtue of inflating asset prices beyond the reach of ordinary people who were used to being able to afford an ordinary house by working in an ordinary job an ordinary number of hours. I really think that this is a chance for some intergenerational connection between millennials and Gen X, because in much the same way that these Gen Xers were blamed for living beyond their means, living extravagantly, buying homes that they couldn't afford, millennials are also being blamed for our failure to participate in the house market, which is, the meme avocado toast. We're all just eating way too much avocado toast, and if we could stop, if we could kick the habit, then we would be homeowners like our parents would. We know it's not true. It's not true for us now. It's not true for the Gen Xers who were hurt in the 2008 financial crash. What we really have is widening inequality, which is pushing us out of the same lifestyles that our parents had. And unfortunately, unless we do something about it, it's just going to continue. And then we'll have to come up with a creative reason why our kids don't live up to the same standard of living that we do. I don't want to be a total bummer. I do think that there are things that we can do to prevent and reverse this inequality. I'll talk about those in later videos, but I really wanted to look at this, the 2008 financial crisis, because after having watched Gary's Economics, after having watched Folding Ideas, I felt like there was something that was being missed in the conversation, and hopefully I did a good job of explaining what that missing thing was: inequality. As always, thank you very much for watching. Like the video, leave a comment, subscribe, do all the things that let YouTube know that this video is worth watching, and I'll see you again next week for more middle class economics discussion.